Yo, what's up everyone? It's me, Nagato's Revenge, and welcome back to my channel. Hopefully everyone is doing okay and hopefully everyone is staying safe. Today is April 30th, 2020, and I'll be kicking off something really new and fresh on my channel. For some random reason, I came up with this idea while I was just, talking to people on Discord, and I wanted to just start a new podcast on my channel and just kind of give a more relaxed tone rather than do just my regular content, or basically how I usually drop content and videos on my channel. Most of you guys know me from either my tutorial based guides or just me working around with a lot of stuff dealing with like preservation and rare games and titles of that nature. However, I think I want to, change my content a little bit and add some more flavor to my channel. Thus, that's why I think I was going to go ahead and start this podcast. So welcome to Vibing with Nagato. This is episode 1. All of the audio you'll hear here will basically be, unedited. This is straight raw footage. So if you hear me stuttering, I do apologize. But I do want to create just a basic, not live stream, what I'm trying to say, a podcast for you guys. Just talking about some things I want to talk about in the modding scene itself. And the main topic we're going to be talking about today is the PlayStation 3 and why I still think that this system is a beast, not only just to have but just in the modding scene as well. What I do want to state as well, I will have the official audio to this basically like audio transcript for this podcast itself in the link in the description down below, and I might have a specific SoundCloud just with my episodes as audio files if you guys are more interested into that. But with that being all out the way, I'm not too sure how long I'm going to be talking for today, but I will be giving kind of a background on why I really love the PlayStation 3, probably then more than any other system or console. So yeah, I think I could start with a story back in like 2005 and 2006. I was basically in like the 3rd grade, or I think 2nd or 3rd grade. It's kind of fuzzy for me, but I remember it was the time around the PlayStation 3 was coming out. I already previously owned a PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2, and I'm always basically was a PlayStation Sony fan. I had Crash Bandicoot as a kid. I had some other games like for Sony in terms of like Midnight Club. I know that's not a Sony title, but that's from Rockstar. But I had basically all the PlayStation classics, like Gran Turismo, Tomb Raider, Spyro, such and so forth. However, as a kid growing up, everyone wants a video game console, and I know with the PlayStation 3 and its new graphics, even as a 6 or 7 year old kid, I wanted that PS3 so bad. Unfortunately, my mother at the time couldn't afford that console, but I used to beg like almost every Christmas, or basically every Christmas time or every birthday or any time I wanted like a toy or whatever, I always brought up the PlayStation 3. So for a while until 2011, so about before I think the PS3 released in 2006, so 2007, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 6 years until I had to wait to get my very first PS3, which I happily did get it on Christmas Eve of 2011. My mother by then basically had the money and funds to afford it, and I finally got something that I've been dying for years, because I really wanted to play Gran Turismo 5, and that came out in 2011 around the same time I got my PlayStation 3. But with that being out the way, the reason why I wanted the PlayStation 3 so bad, it was due to the fact of just the games that was coming out for it. I know Final Fantasy 13 was coming out, Gran Turismo 5 Prologue around that time. Little Big Planet was on it, and I remember getting my PlayStation 3 on Christmas Eve in particular, and I basically didn't have any games for it, and the only game that I could play was PlayStation Home, which played a vital role in my life. Not only I love that game to death, even the servers are still down, but I now work with a preservation team in hopes of restoring the online functionality, and I met a bunch of like ex-developers and such and so forth in the PlayStation Home scene, and met a lot of cool people along the way. But that's besides the point in terms of the PS3. It's just kind of like a side story of that. But the PlayStation 3, to me, the reason why I wanted it back in the day is because it had so many amenities that I don't even think to me personally the Xbox 360 could compete with. It was the cheapest Blu-ray drive. It had backwards compatibility, so it could play PS1, PSP, or not PSP, but PS2 and PS3 titles. of course natively, and that's why I wanted it so bad as a kid. And it had, you know, HDMI output, and it just had like the PlayStation Network then, and you know, you could play with your friends online. So the PS3 for me, before I even got into the whole modding scene of it, which basically opened me up to a world of just new adventures and allowed me to even create content for YouTube later on, the PlayStation 3 was such a sought after system since I wanted it for so long. But one reason I think the PlayStation 3 still holds up into 2020, and this is where I'm going to get to the meat of potatoes of this podcast, just the sheer modding scene, and basically even into like 2020 as I'm recording this, the PlayStation 3 is still getting homebrew and still getting updates on a multitude of like applications that you can utilize. The PlayStation 3, you know, it being a modded system and being, you know, jailbroken and already cracked in 2020, you could do things such as run any homebrew of your choice, like file managers such like as Irisman, Multiman, run games off your USB drive. You could run games off, you know, your PC if you know what you're doing with like Prodigy and Target Manager. You could basically mod any game if you want, if you really wanted to, you know, look at the memory or just use any mod menu for like, you know, the bigger titles like GTA 5 and Call of Duty. Having a PlayStation 3 still in 2020 is still a Blu-ray drive. It can still play PlayStation 1 disc natively as long as you have any model. And if you have a certain model of PlayStation 3, whether it be a 20 gigabyte, 60 gigabyte, or basically with the PS3s that had the the not net emulation, but the actual hardware emotion chip onto the board, you could play PS2 games natively. Even with the PlayStation 3 and the homebrew scene in terms of emulation, it's crazy. Since, you know, PS3 has a port, and I think RetroArch started off the PS3. Basically, RetroArch has a multitude of cores and just embedded emulators within that application where you could just play Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, and such and so forth. Just with the PlayStation 3, and the PS3 has so many things you could do with it, like on custom firmware, or even back in the day, you could run Linux. So I know probably it's not practical now, but at one point these PS3 systems were even utilized as a US Condor cluster for the Air Force, utilizing a Linux operating system. So the PlayStation 3 was basically like a computer at home, and it was used as a supercomputer around the world for like a bunch of other projects. And I'll probably have links and quotes to all of the stuff I'm talking about today. But to me personally, PlayStation 3, when it first launched, like the original model, was a beast of a system, just because it had all those SD card slots for USB. You know, of course, it had HDMI and AV. It had backwards compatibility. It was really a system of its time, and I think even compared the original PlayStation 3 to the original PS4, it really has nothing on it. I mean, even the PS3 still to this day has some stuff that the PS4 doesn't really have. Like, it has the ability to play audio files and video files off the XMB. On the PlayStation 4 you can do this, but it's like, you know, it requires extra steps, and it requires you to have a USB always at hand, and it doesn't really read videos and movies on drive. So even in that regard, the PlayStation 3 still has some cool features that even the PS4 doesn't even implement as just a regular retail console. I'm not talking about, you know, having a modded device, but the modding scene for the PlayStation 3 is still amazing. I still love the PS3 to death, not only just because of its cool homebrew and stuff like that, but just the overall community, just to see people still trying to crack the PS3 even more, just to see the PlayStation 3 still being utilized for preservation purposes in terms of like rebuilding up online servers for games like Metal Gear Online, or basically the Metal Gear Solid game, Metal Gear 4 I believe. Warhawk is getting some preservation stuff, PlayStation Home, and such and so forth. And I do love one thing about the PlayStation 3, which dawned on me right now. Basically, the PS3 still has free online, which is still cool, and even on PS4 and stuff like that, you know, you have to pay with PlayStation Plus. But the PlayStation 3, even though you know, it had its quirks and it had like the Yellow Light of Death and Red Ring of Death, I still think the PS3 as a general console, and even having it as a modern console, from whether it be homebrew, emulation, you know, basically doing save data hacks, and you know, PlayStation 2 patch games, and using Japanese patch games on English firmware, or excuse me, with a English system, is pretty cool as well. And being with the PS3 being region lock, you can play basically any game you want for whatever region, which is another reason why I love the PlayStation 3. But yeah, that's basically all I have to say for today's podcast. I know I was probably rambling on and I'm all over the place, but if you guys did enjoy this audio, basically, or this podcast I should say, please leave a like, please be sure to subscribe, and if you guys did enjoy this, let me know and I'll probably do another one in the future. With that being said, my name is Nagato's Revenge and I'm signing out. Peace.